Woodwork Geek back here again. Interesting little project this week. A set of floating picture frame shelves. So this is a little kind of pet project in between other bigger projects. It was made from oak from a school bookcase. So a friend managed to pull the bookcase from a skip and identify this wood, and then asked me if I could create these picture frames from it. So here you can see in a raw format. So there was 4 pieces of wood. I just trim that wood down to try and get the best use of that material. So the actual frames come out about 70 by 30, and they're about 11.5 centimeters wide. So once I finished dimensioning all the timber, the first thing that I then needed to do was to take the finish off. So I went to the trusty drum sander. I fitted an old set of kind of paper on there so that I didn't gum up on any new paper basically, and then I just gently took the drum sander down, taking more and more off until I got clean finished surfaces on the 2 wide sides. Once all of the finish was off, the next task was to then rough cut the timber to size. So as you can see on some of them going through, there's kind of gaps in the timber where the shelves were on the bookcase. So I couldn't use that in the design, so I went to the chop saw and then used the chop saw to take out all of the rough pieces of wood and get rid of the splits, give myself clean finished edges, so that I then had the best stock. Now you can see the shelf positions just there, so that I knew exactly how much timber I then had left, because I wasn't sure at this point whether I was going to be able to make 2, 3 or as it turns out 4 of these shelves. So just tidying up all the wood to get to the best possible sizes. Then the drum sanders finished the 2 face sizes, but the top and the bottoms were just rough sawn. So I run them through the planer here, cleaning up one edge, and then after I'd cleaned all of that face, it was then to the thicknesser to then make sure that they were parallel across the whole length, so that I had an exact kind of dimension to work from top and bottom. As with everything, the machining of all this wood is where the effort kind of goes in. Once you've got machined wood, everything gets a little bit easier. Once all the timber is properly dimensioned, it's then a case of cutting all the 45s. So the way I did it for this project is that I lined up stop blocks on the chop saw, so that I had repeatable cuts for all the long lengths and repeatable cuts for all of the short lengths, and I could just run them through all at one time, knowing that because I was using the stop blocks, each length would be exactly the same dimension, so that when the box goes together, it comes together square and true, and I don't have any problems with assembly. It sounds sensible and easy, but it's taken me many years of doing it the wrong way to work out what the right way would be. And here you can see I'm just going through that now, just making sure that all the angles are in the right place. So the 2 shortest edges of the 45 point to each other, so that you get that kind of rectangle. Once all the mitre joints are done, I then prepare for dominoing. So I use very small dominoes on this project just to align the corners, so that there's no kind of risk of them breaking away when something's put on the shelf, because these are all going to be hung by hidden fasteners, so the shelf needs to hold against the verticals to keep everything in place. Now this first box I did with just a single domino, and it was my learning piece. I made a few mistakes on this one in terms of I should have finish sanded the insides of that box before I put it together. So for the second, third and fourth boxes, here you can see, having learnt from the mistake of the first one, and here I am taking it from 80 grit up to 120 grit on each of those pieces so that everything is finish sanded and ready to go. Once all the finish sanding is done, I then use sort of high quality painter's tape to then mask off each of the corners so that if there's any glue that comes out of the joint, it doesn't go on to a finished surface and spoil the look of the piece of wood. It takes a surprising amount of time, 2 pieces of tape per kind of box, 3 boxes, but it's worth it. It means at the end you don't have to kind of scrape glue off or sand glue off of those edges to give yourself a perfect finished piece. What I would say working with this oak is that it was really quite brittle. It must have been in the school for years and years and years before it was rescued, because the wood was very dry, splintery, which I've never really come across with oak before. Normally the older oak I've used has become denser and harder, and so it's a bit of a weird one. It's not something I've seen before. But it did mean that I had to be very careful with the domino and the mitre cuts, just to make sure when those were going into the material it wasn't damaging the material and causing problems in finishing. I did have a few little chips on the inside of the mitre joints that I had to fill in the end just to tidy up, because it was surprisingly different to normal oak. Here's a small box. It's kind of leftover pieces more than anything else. The key requirement was the long thin boxes, so kind of 30 by 70 in centimetres, so what's that, probably 12 inches by 28 inches, something like that. That's a guess, so don't hold me to it, but something of that nature. After all the boxes are made, sanding, more sanding. Can never have enough sanding. So here, just using the Rotex just to clean it up as much as possible, and there's the little filling I was talking about earlier, just to make it as good as it can be. Once I'd done all the sanding, it was then time to cut in the hinges. So I used these kind of hanging hinges and recessed them into the sides, so that when the kind of picture frame shelf is hung on the wall, it's an invisible kind of fixing, and you just use 2 screws to hold it in place. So the way that I did that is I used a 19mm flute in the router and set the fence of the router up so that it left a very small amount on the outside of the cabinet, so you can't see the fixing. And then on the inside, 3 of the boxes were wide enough, but one box was a little bit thinner because there was a ding on the wood, so when kind of sanded down, they were slightly narrower, so the hinge is just visible on the inside. The 19mm radius for the cutter isn't quite the same as the the radius for the hanging hinge, so I did have to use the chisel just to tighten up the kind of radius to allow the hook to go in, or hinge to go in. Then it was final sand, and then this project is done for me. So the customer for these pieces is going to finish them themselves. So all that remains is a few glamour shots, and then delivery to the customer. I have to say, I really enjoyed these. Made a nice little change, and interesting to work with different oak. I didn't expect such a density change on oak. So you live and learn. Hopefully you've all enjoyed watching this YouTube. If you did, then make sure you hit the buttons like, subscribe. If I've been a plonker, feel free to tell me that I've done something wrong. And if there's something you'd like to see me have a go at making, then leave me some comments and I'll see what I can do. Hopefully you liked it, and we'll see you again on the next one. Woodwork Geek out.